Moving abroad and living in a foreign country might seem like a great, exciting adventure, and it is. But what happens when the romance wears off? Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you 7 cons of living abroad that I have experienced. Now, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that each time I upload a video about living abroad, moving abroad, or finding the confidence and courage to live life on your terms, you will be notified. My name is Patricia Brooks, and back in 2015, I got the desire, the urge, the inclination to make a move abroad. But I was afraid to do so. Over the ensuing several years, I did some inner work and I found the confidence and courage to move to France in 2018. And I've been here for 4 years. And I'm going to share with you the things I don't like so much about living in a foreign country so that you have a sense of what it's really like. I think one of the reasons that I have done so well in adjusting and not letting these ruffle my feathers too much is because I had some good clarity on where I wanted to move abroad. And to give you a little background on that, I wanted to move to France because I wanted to become fluent in French. I also wanted to be exposed to challenges that would help me to grow personally, and boy, have I experienced those. And finally, I wanted to live in a place where I felt free to be me, where I felt like home. And France, and the south of France in particular, felt like that to me. So that is why I moved here. But there are some things that aren't so positive. And the first con of living abroad is communication and understanding. Now, this is particularly true when you move to a country that speaks a language other than your native tongue, but it can also relate to if you speak English and you're moving to an English-speaking country, you might experience some of this as well because there are words and phrases that don't exist in your vernacular or that are used differently. But from coming from an English-speaking country to a French-speaking country, the language is completely different. And so even though when I moved here, I had a good base of the language, I struggled to communicate and to understand because I was so far out of my element that I could not think clearly. I was so nervous and worried that my brain wasn't working. So I knew words. I knew how to put, sentences together. And I was like, blah, 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 blah. Or when somebody was talking to me in French, somehow the words did not compute. And so that was a really off-putting and made me feel stupid in the beginning. But even now, 4 years in, I find myself still having to look up words that I don't understand when I'm reading a newspaper, when I'm watching the news. And recently, the French President Macron said something that got people up in arms. He said that he wanted to, je veux emmerder les non-vaccinés. And I did not know what the word emmerder meant. And so I looked it up in the dictionary and I still didn't have clarity around what this meant. I was like, I don't think it's good, but I'm not really sure exactly what he is saying. And that made me feel kind of like an outsider because everybody else is talking about this and they're kind of like up in arms. And here I'm like, yeah, but what does he really mean? And I wasn't the only one because there is an expat group that I belong to on Facebook, Americans in France, where somebody asked that very question. Well, what does this really mean? What was he trying to say? And people opined. And I have come to the understanding that he was saying, I really want to piss off the people who are not vaccinated. And so I'm like, if that's the true meaning, then I understand, what all the to-do is about. But, it kind of loses something when you have to do some research about that. So communicating and understanding, even when you have a good command of the language, is something that is not always so much fun. So that's con number 1. So con number 2 is having to apply for a visa every single year and prove that I deserve to belong someplace that I feel like is my new home. And while, in the future, I might apply for French citizenship or I might get a visa where I don't have to apply every year. The reality for me now is each year I have to do this process. And I bring a stack of papers, kind of know what the process is now to get my visa renewed. And it's a stressful process. And so this is a con for me. In the United States, as a U.S. citizen, sure, there were certain things I had to do, like file my taxes on an annual basis, file my state taxes on an annual basis. But proving that I deserve to belong there was not one of those things. So this is a reminder that, yes, I am an expat. I am a foreigner living in a foreign country, and that each year I have to ask again to be here. And I've accepted that because that is a part of what I need to do in order to stay here. But it's still a con nevertheless. So con number 3 really depends on where you're coming from and where you're moving to. And it has to do with the amount of daylight and when the sun rises and sets in your new country. For me, I moved from Richmond, Virginia, where in the autumn months, the sun rose pretty early, like 7:15. Well, here in the south of France where I am, the sun rises about a whole hour later, around 8:15. And that really kind of slowed my day, put a slow start to my day. It made me feel lazy.
You're so lazy.
And I didn't recognize that this was at play during my first year. It was only in my second year. And still my body has not adapted to, oh yeah, the sun is going to come up a little later and you're going to get a later start. I mean, maybe it's not my body that hasn't adapted. Maybe it's my mindset, the go, go, do mentality. But that is something that I don't really like about living where I am. And I think this can be even exacerbated if you move, from a country that has a lot of light or more light in the wintertime to one like Norway or Sweden, where they have 4.5 hours of sunlight during this time of year. That can be a big challenge to overcome. So, as I said, it really depends on where you're moving from, and 2, whether or not you would find this a con. But for me, this is definitely a con. So those are the first 3 cons to living in a foreign country. Of those 3, which one do you think you would struggle with the most? Comment below. So moving on to con number 4, and this has to do with cultural differences and adapting to cultural differences. Now, you might say, well, that's one of the reasons I want to move to a foreign country. And it's one of the reasons that I did too, because I knew that would pose a challenge that would help me to grow personally. And it has. But when you decide to live someplace long term, and those cultural differences are something that are more challenging to adapt to, and you find a little frustration behind them, then it's not so much fun. Right? Yeah, the personal challenge, yeah, but it's still not so much fun. So for example, my first year, I, as an American, am kind of smiling, kind of bubbly. And I would walk down the streets of Perpignan, which was the first city I moved to, smiling. And other people that passed me on the streets, they were not smiling. And sometimes they had a scowl on their face. And that was a little jarring for me, to come from a place where people seem to be more friendly on the surface. And I can do a video on that. Are French people less friendly than Americans in another video? But that was off-putting for me. I also wanted to make friends. And so I went to a meetup where we were doing laughter yoga. And when I walked into the building, before it started, there were people standing around in a group. And so I went over, I smiled, and I said, "Je m'appelle Patricia," expecting them to tell me what their names were. And they all looked at me like I had 2 heads. Well, it wasn't until last year when I read the book, The Bonjour Effect, that I recognized and understood that, giving your name is something personal, and that French people typically don't do that early on. Right? So, but that was off-putting and made me feel like an outsider. These are the things that can really be hard and be a con of living in a foreign country. along those lines, when you are making a new life for yourself in a new country, you're going to have to do things you did in your old country, like go to the doctor and know what the process is. And you don't. So you go and things are different and you feel bewildered. And I'm saying this for years in because this is still an experience for me of being a little unsettled when you go in and you're not sure what the process is. And the person behind the desk expects you as a 50-some-odd-year-old woman to know, well, this is how you do things here. And so not understanding where I'm coming from and not being able to give me guidance to make me feel more at ease, right? Those are real challenges and cons that, will get easier and easier, but they still exist for me. So con number 4 is adjusting to cultural differences and working to not feel like an outsider. Con number 5 is related to cultural differences, and that is making friends and deeper connections. So now I have a handful of friends that I know I can count on here, but it has taken me a while to get there. And part of the challenge that I faced was, or are people befriending me because I'm an American? Maybe they want to practice their English. Or are they befriending me because they really want to be my friend? So that was an element that I had to kind of get through in the beginning. But then also recognizing that, French people may have acquaintances, but they have very few people in their inner circles. And so being new and wanting to have these stronger connections was at odds with how many French people interact and engage. And so that's why it's taken me as long as it has to have this handful of friends that I know I can count on. But it happened. It's a process. So the con here is making deeper connections. Now, con number 6 has to do with friends back in your old country. You're going to lose touch. People you thought were really good friends might drop off the face of the earth and you might not communicate with them. And as you are moving into your new life in your new country, and you might be feeling isolated like I did in my first year, when you lose contact with people that you thought were your friends, that makes you feel more isolated. Now, I will say that it also has allowed me to see who my true friends are. And I've been back to the United States a few times, and I have a couple of really, really dear friends who I know are dear friends because of how they have welcomed me back into their homes as I was visiting and treated me like family members. So there's the con of, those people you thought were closer, aren't willing to put in the effort to continue, and you've moved on and they're going in different directions, and it all makes sense, but it doesn't feel good when you're feeling like, I'm all alone, right? So that is a con of moving abroad, losing touch with family and friends. And finally, con number 7. And this is one that has taken me a little while to get to. This is the romantic part of living abroad and moving abroad is going to fall away. The honeymoon period is going to end, and you are going to realize that, well, this is just life and is a little more challenging because of all of the cultural differences. It's a little more challenging because sometimes I don't understand. It's a little more challenging because I want the sun to rise a little earlier, right? It's a little more challenging because I want to put my clothes in the dryer and have them dried in an hour and not have to plan, I need to wash this 2 days ahead so that it's dry by the time I want to wear it, right? It's those things that will be with you long term that you're going to have to put up with. Now, I will say I do plan on buying a dryer when I buy my house. But until then, it's hanging up my clothes on a clothesline, which is something I've never had to do before I moved to France. And I think that all of these cons can be made easier to deal with when you have moved to a country that is the right country for you. And I stated early on, I knew why I wanted to move abroad, and France fit the bill for me. But you may not be sure what country is right for you. Or maybe you do, and you kind of want to just double check that you're picking the best country for you. Well, if that's the case, I have a questionnaire that can help you to get some clarity or some confirmation on which country is right for you. And I'm going to put a link to that in the description. And so you can feel free to download that free copy and get that clarity. Now, I've been through all 7 of the cons of living abroad. Which of those 7 do you feel would be the most challenging for you? Comment below. Thank you for watching. And if you're interested in learning more about the cultural differences that I find challenging, you can watch this video here, and be sure to subscribe and like, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.